Trump's DC Takeover. Trump has seized control of DC's police, deploying 800 National Guard troops and hundreds of federal agents, claiming a crime emergency despite falling violent crime rates.
This is so typical of Trump. He is constantly falsely calling emergencies. Undocumented immigrants are an emergency. They're stalking our streets, killing people, committing horrendous crimes, when in fact undocumented immigrants commit crimes at far lower rates than native-born Americans. And overwhelmingly, the undocumented immigrants that they've rounded up either have no criminal convictions, over 70%, or convictions for minor offenses like trivial traffic violations. You know, he declared an economic emergency to justify his tariffs, even though the economy was doing extremely well, better than virtually any other economy around the world. The problem is he's the president. And under our system, the president has tremendous powers to do what he wants just by unilaterally declaring an emergency. Remember, Donald Trump has said multiple times, as president, I can do anything I want. He compared himself to a king. He's even gone so far as to say, because I'm saving the country, I can do anything. I can't actually break the law.
Just because you have the power to do something doesn't mean you should.
In fact, it means you should act with restraint and circumspection.
Right.
But that's not what authoritarians do. Authoritarians use their power to gain control over the country. And that's exactly what we're seeing under Donald Trump in so many significant ways. And, you know, this is another Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance moment. The takeover of the D.C. Police enforcement is bad enough unto itself, but it's one of those relatively small things that opens up a vastly larger cavern of truth. Speaking of truth, Donald Trump, of course, has justified his emergency in D.C. by claiming soaring crime in D.C. People aren't safe in their homes, on the streets, in shopping, because crime is soaring under the Democratic leadership in D.C. Well, let's look at actual FBI statistics of crime. Has crime soared in the last year or two, Sam?
No, it's downward.
It's sharply downward. Not increasing, but sharply decreasing. And contrary to what Trump says, is it anywhere close to record crime in D.C.?
Not even in the ballpark, it looks like.
Not even in the ballpark. Look at the 1990s. Crime is 3-4 times, not 3 to 4%, 3 to 4 times, maybe even 5 times. I'm just looking at this visually, higher than it is right now. Just another blatant fabrication, blatant lie on the part of Donald Trump. Not surprising. This is a guy who said he won the 2020 election in a landslide, that everybody wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade, that is introduce a new gold. I can go on and on. And if you think for a moment that Donald Trump really cares about police forces and law and order, what do I have to sell you, Sam?
I don't know. You tell me.
A very big bridge in my hometown of Brooklyn. This is a guy who sat watching for 3 hours the violence and mayhem in a unique invasion of our Capitol, a coup attempted, an insurrection. He sits there and watches it. Didn't call out the National Guard, even inflamed the mob by attacking Mike Pence. And then he pardoned violent offenders, including those who attacked and injured the police. This has nothing to do with supporting the police. It has nothing to do with public safety. It has everything to do that Donald Trump wants to use the military to clamp down on his control of our lives, our freedoms, and our liberties.
Has this ever happened before? This is unprecedented, right?
Unprecedented. I mean, of course, the National Guard and the military has been called in, for example, in the 1992 Los Angeles riots, but typically when there is a real emergency like those riots, and typically in consultation and consort with local officials. Both the mayor of Los Angeles and the governor of California supported the calling in of federal troops in the National Guard. Not so the government of the District of Columbia, which he didn't even consult with before militarizing law enforcement in D.C. And if he really cared about law enforcement and the police, the last thing you want to do is militarize law enforcement. This was something that was one of the greatest fears of the framers of our Constitution, who conservatives are supposed to revere and respect. They were even reluctant to authorize the establishment of a standing army because they feared that the military could be used to establish a tyranny or a dictatorship in the United States. And we haven't seen this before until the advent of Donald Trump. And we know dictatorial regimes throughout history have done two things, which is exactly what Donald Trump is doing. Number one, controlling culture and education to conform with their own orthodoxy and squelch and crush any kind of independent alternative thinking. And secondly, the boot in the face, the use of the military to establish and enforce their powers. These two complementary techniques are the hallmarks of dictatorship. And we haven't seen that before until the advent of Donald Trump. And we've talked a lot about how he's trying to control our culture, our education, our universities, our K-12 schools, to comport with his own utterly distorted, politically driven views of American history and of American culture. So while it's enough of a violation that he's militarized policing in D.C., but this opens up, I said, the much broader issue of the widespread use of the military, or now this greatly beefed up ICE agency that's accountable to no one, or other federal law enforcement agencies, to exercise his power and override local governments that he doesn't like, that are elected officials that don't agree with what Donald Trump is doing, Donald Trump's politics, or Donald Trump's values. So
and the thing about L.A., at least, I mean, something was happening there. There were at least protests happening, a little bit of unrest due to the ICE enforcement. There's nothing happening in D.C. There's no emergency. There's no protest. There was nothing happening in D.C.
Not to justify a national emergency.
Right.
But that doesn't stop Trump. He just fabricates things as he goes along.
Is there any way to stop this? There's just nothing the residents of D.C. can do?
Here's the problem. D.C. is an easy target, right? It's not a state. It's not a truly independent city. It has certain home rule powers, but ultimately the federal government wields the stick over D.C. So there's really very little D.C. can do to push back. You can go to the courts, which is, as we know, a long, slow process, a very fraught process. It's not at all clear, even if you won in the lower courts, that the Supreme Court would agree with plaintiffs in this kind of lawsuit, particularly given the very broad powers granted to a president in a declaration of a national emergency. Trump is taking advantage of huge loopholes in our laws in a way no prior president has done. I wrote about this in 2021, 4 years ago, in my book, 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump, in which I pointed out there are all these loopholes in our democracy that an authoritarian like Trump could exploit, which is exactly what he's doing in his second term, and that any other authoritarian-minded president can exploit. And, given the current politics, it's going to be very difficult to effectively close any of these 13 loopholes to our democracy that I have identified so far. If Trump really cared about law enforcement, really cared about crime, instead of just making things up and using the military in a way it's not necessary and dangerous, he could have consulted with the DC government, the DC police, consulted with authorities who understand how to deal with crime, and developed a real strategy for dealing with crime. If he truly cared about the police and crime, that's what he would do. Instead, this is just a part of his attempt to militarize our country.
So I understand your general hypothesis about why he's doing it, but why is he doing it right now? Because some people are theorizing that it's to distract from something else, maybe Epstein or some Doge employee got attacked, and maybe it's a direct reaction from that. Why is he doing this right now? I mean, on paper, it makes no sense, right? We talked about crime rates dropping, 30-year low. It's dropped even in the last few years. Why now, of all times?
Did you ever hear of Willie Sutton, Sam?
No.
The most prolific bank robber in the history of the country. And he was asked, why do you rob banks? And you know what his answer was?
Because I can? I don't know.
Pretty much. That's where the money is. So why is Trump doing it? That's where the power is. And he's doing everything as rapidly, as soon as he possibly can. It has nothing to do with objective facts. It has everything to do with Trump's power agenda. That's where the power is. That's where the money is. And by the way, as we know, Trump's exercise of power, there's always the money behind it.
I don't know. That seems too vague of an answer.
It's not vague.
But why now? Why of all times now? Because nothing leads you to believe that this would be the time, even if he wanted to do it, right, for power or whatever you're saying.
This is the time. He is not waiting. He wants to do as much as he can, as quickly as he can. Okay, he could lose control of the Congress in 2026. There could be future court decisions that rein him in. He is, and maybe also, I don't disagree with you, that a secondary motive, one that's much less important, would be to distract from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, and which he can't seem to shake. That also explains, the absurdity of claiming Barack Obama, maybe our cleanest president, didn't have a whiff of scandal in his 8 years, is somehow a traitor. Absolute nonsense. And while he's fabricating out of thin air the idea that Barack Obama's a traitor, he is celebrating real traitors, Sam, right? The Confederates. He's building statues, restoring statues, celebrating Confederates. He's renaming bases in the name of Confederates.
We know all that about that. Let's stick to the topic at hand. I want to make a point because I think it's something I can't wrap my mind around. Okay, let's say the Trump administration, which we know they're not, but they are genuinely concerned about crime, right?
No,
they're not. But let's say they are, right? What would putting in the National Guard for 30 days do to reduce crime in D.C.?
Nothing. Look, this has nothing to do. You're off base. This has nothing to do with reducing crime.
Let me finish my thought.
All right.
There are people. Look, I've lived in D.C. for many years. I don't live there now. I haven't lived there in a couple of years. But look, there are some issues with crime, and they need to be addressed. There's no doubt, right? But once the National Guard leaves, what's going to stop the crime from rising back up in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? It's not even
2 months.
It's not even a Band-Aid solution. It's like I don't even know what's less than a Band-Aid solution.
You're absolutely right. And as I said, if he really cared about crime, I outlined what he should have done and what any responsible president who actually cared about crime. So my point is, this has zero to do with crime. Crime is going down. He claims it's, soaring in D.C. Yes, D.C. has a crime issue. Every big city, anywhere in the world, has a crime issue.
Not Tokyo.
Maybe not Tokyo.
Not Shanghai.
Yeah. Well, maybe not every city, but most cities around the world, and certainly in the United States, have crime issues. But this is the opposite of what you want to do if you really cared about solving the crime problem. But this is exactly what you want to do if you want to assert your authority to use the military to cement your power over our freedoms and liberties.
It's not rocket science. If you look at crime, it's caused by underlying issues that you can solve. Broken homes, poverty, bad education systems. Why don't we address that?
He's making all that worse.
Right.
Not addressing that. He's making every one of those issues worse. Again, he doesn't care about any of that. He is driven by his own interests, his own lust for power, and his own greed for money. That explains everything Trump does.